BBC Radio London.
Good morning, Monday morning. My name's Duncan Bark, sitting in for Vanessa Feltz all this week on BBC Radio London. Contact details are the same. The voice is slightly different. 020 722 42000. I want to get your thoughts on something you've just heard in the news with Matthew there. Regarding something that sadly we often talk about on this radio station. You often see the headlines in the newspapers, and we hear from the victims. Or rather the families of victims who have lost their lives on the roads of London as a result of riding a bicycle. Now, the former director of public prosecutions, a gentleman called Sir Keir Starmer, says the way cycling deaths are treated by police and prosecutors may need to change. He went on to say there was a very strong case for the Crown Prosecution Service to make the final decision on whether to prosecute cases. Now, currently, the police service decides whether to pass a case on to the CPS after investigating a cycling death. The CPS said cases should be referred to a prosecutor as early as possible. Some numbers for you here so we can put it into context. Last year in the United Kingdom, so this is a national figure, Department of Transport figures show that 113 cyclists were killed in the UK last year. We're not talking about people who are injured here. We're not talking about minor incidents. We're talking about deaths on the roads of this country. 113 cyclists killed in the UK last year, according to the Department of Transport figures. Do those figures shock you at all? There's a question for you this morning on BBC Radio London. I mean, quite often you hear someone on the radio reading out a load of numbers, and I do it. I do it from time to time, but I try and avoid it because sometimes I think numbers can be a little bit meaningless. But does that shock you at all? 113 cyclists killed in the UK last year, according to the Department of Transport. I could also tell you that last year a Freedom of Information request by the BBC's Newsbeat found that between 2007 and 2014, there were 276 recorded incidents. This is where a cyclist was killed in an accident involving a motor vehicle. Now, of these, so out of 276, 148 of them, which is just over 50%, resulted in the driver of the vehicle being charged with an offence. Of those found guilty, fewer than half went to prison. Sir Keir Starmer, who is the former Director of Public Prosecutions, he's now a Labour MP, told the BBC that if a death was involved and it was serious enough to have a criminal investigation, then, quote, it really ought to go off to the CPS for the final decision, unquote. What is the view of cycling campaigners? Well, we'll talk to one in a second, but the overall view seems to be we need a change in liability. Cycling campaigners are calling for a change in liability. Who is considered responsible for a collision in civil cases? And at the moment, there is no presumption on either side. The question I put to you this morning on BBC Radio London is, well, I suppose there are a couple of questions. Do drivers need to face more responsibility for cycling accidents, cycling fatalities? 020 722 42000. And should there always be a prosecution? I'd love to get your answers on this morning on BBC Radio London. And, of course, you can look at this from a couple of perspectives. If you're listening to this and you are someone who drives around our city, you will have a very distinct view. If you're someone who moves around this city on two wheels, you will also have a very distinct view. And maybe you're someone who's listening who's been involved in a cycling accident. What happened? Because there is some thinking here that the police perhaps don't take it as seriously as possible. A senior lawyer who has dealt with a number of cases involving cyclists said he thought it was problematic that some senior police officers have said they would not commute on a bike in the capital. This is Martin Porter QC. He said they're looking at cycling as a dangerous activity. Their emphasis then, and the emphasis of some coroners, is upon whether a cyclist is wearing a crash helmet or high-vis equipment, rather than on whether the people driving in the vicinity of vulnerable road users like cyclists are taking the appropriate amount of care not to collide with them. Suzette Davenport, who's the roads policing lead for the National Police Chiefs Council, told the BBC, "I wouldn't do that because it's too busy. There are too many risks. One of the things as a police officer, but also in my roads policing role, is my sense of risk is so heightened because of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We know there are a range of people who don't go home at the end of the day." And then, of course, we have the top cop in London, the head of the Metropolitan Police, Bernard Hogan-Howe, who's also previously said he would not cycle in London. So there's lots to chew over there, but I want to find out from you this morning on BBC Radio London, when we talk about cycling accidents and incidents in this city of ours, do drivers need to face more responsibility for cycling accidents, or heaven forbid a fatality? And should there always be a prosecution? I've talked about this on various radio shows over the years. I've personally reached the conclusion I don't think there'll ever be peace made between motorists and cyclists in this city of ours. It's almost like there are some elements of both parties who quite like the idea of blaming the other party. Maybe that's an unfair observation to make. Maybe there is some kind of nuanced solution to this. But you're the expert. You're the person who drives around this city in a motor car or in a van or in a cab or in a lorry. You're someone who goes around this city of ours on two wheels. What is the reality? 020 722 42000. And as I get older, I like to have a little bit of positivity in my life. So will London ever be safe for cyclists? How can London be made safer for people on two wheels who are pedalling? Send me a text. Start your message with the word London. Add your comments. Send it all off to 81333. You can email Vanessa, because that's who I am this week, vanessa@bbc.co.uk. On social media, Twitter @VanessaOnAir, Facebook.com/The Vanessa Show. But I'm in the market for a bit of early morning, mid-morning chat. 020 722 42000. Let's get a thought on this. Donnachadh McCarthy, from Stop Killing Cyclists joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Duncan.
Now, listen, I appreciate your time. Thank you. I mean, your initial reaction to what the former Director of Public Prosecutions is saying. He's saying the way cycling deaths are treated by police and prosecutors needs to change. I'm guessing you'd be in support of this.
Yes, we've got an inherent bias in our system, in our justice system in the United Kingdom. Most people administrating themselves are drivers. And so we look at the justice system and look at the results, and it is evident in the cases of lack of prosecutions, and indeed in the fines and sentences handed out, that juries, police and judges, who are all drivers, naturally empathise with the driver, and this leads to injustice in the system. So Britain is one of only 5 countries across Europe that always presumes the pedestrian or the cyclist is at fault unless you can prove the driver's at fault.
So what are you suggesting here? We need to get more of the judiciary, we need to get senior police officers on their bikes?
That would be really positive, but one of the biggest things that we are calling for is to reverse the liability law. Every other country in Europe presumes the driver's at fault, and that means that the insurance company has to pay up. In Britain, we always presume the pedestrian or the cyclist killed or injured is at fault, and unless we can prove the driver is at fault, no insurance company pays out for the awful damage and loss of earnings and costs implied in these terrible accidents.
I mean, this is, dare I suggest, quite a contentious suggestion of yours, for the simple reason whenever I talk about cycling in London on this radio station, I get caller after caller from people who are behind the wheel of a cab or a motor vehicle of some description saying, look, hang on a second, this is, it takes two to tango, and it's not just drivers who need to be responsible on the roads of London. Cyclists have a part to play too.
I agree 100% with that.
Yeah, but then that's followed up with the fact that a lot of cyclists, and you've heard the arguments on this station, they're often rehearsed, which is, they don't have lights on, they're not wearing fluorescent clothing at night, they're jumping red lights. So how do you counter that?
Duncan, I'm saying I agree with you. I'm saying everybody on the road has to take responsibility, of course, for their safety.
Yeah.
However, we have to recognise that pedestrians and cyclists aren't doing the injuring and killing. It's the vehicle.
No, I understand that, and of course,
why it's important. So we accept that there are people who are walking, cycling, and driving who make mistakes. But when you are a driver and you break the speed limit, or you're drinking, or you have a mobile phone in your hand, or God forbid, people are looking at movies in their cars. and they hit somebody.
Yes, but surely those are extreme examples.
No, the surveys have shown over 50% of London, of drivers, break the speed limit every week.
All right, I'm just putting forward the opposite view of people who will phone up this radio station and say, hang on a second, it works both ways. Let me just put something to you, because I'm interested in your reaction. If you believe that we need to change the law so there is a presumption that the driver is at fault,
hang on, in civil cases.
Yeah.
That's hugely different from civil cases compared to criminal cases. Of course, people are innocent until proven guilty, but in civil cases, we're trying to decide who pays for the accident, the insurance company or the victim. And in this country, it's the victim is always presumed to pay for it, and that's the problem. We don't want any motorist to end up with a massive cost or unfair situation. But the current situation is the insurance companies are making millions profits when they should be funding the costs of the accidents in London.
Yes, and it can be argued that in any of these cases, it's only the insurance companies who come out smelling of roses. They're the only ones who win. What needs to change?
Many things. Well, but I think in some ways this artificial war you described between pedestrians, cyclists and drivers, it's actually a symptom of the fact we haven't invested in our infrastructure in London in the way they have in other European countries such as Amsterdam and so when I'm a HG driver...
I mean, forgive me for interrupting. Do you think a war exists?
I think there's an awful lot of aggression by drivers and anger out there on the roads, and there's an awful lot of fear. Remember, 2/3 of Londoners want to cycle, but they're afraid to cycle. And that has a huge death... You talked about figures earlier. You talked about 133 people dying across the UK. Yeah. But we feel cyclists are the canary in the mine shaft. In London, it's estimated 12,000 people are dying from traffic issues every year. What we mean by that is 9,000 people are dying from pollution, traffic pollution, and an estimated 3,000 people are dying from inactivity diseases because they're afraid to cycle. This is a huge issue for London, and we argue that if we invest the money in making London streets safe for cyclists, everybody benefits.
Do you think London is built for cyclists? And what I mean by that is people often refer to and given the comparison as you did a few moments ago of Amsterdam. I mean, Amsterdam and London are poles apart, aren't they? I mean, can London ever be a mini Amsterdam?
Well, we'd like it to be a greater Amsterdam. If you look at their cities all over the world, whether you talk about New York, Seville, Copenhagen, even Paris, major cities across the world are seeing the writing on the wall. The current transport systems that operate in London are killing Londoners. In Amsterdam was the exact same problem in the 70s, and they went out and they protested and lay on the street and said, we have to do something to keep our children safe, to make streets fit for humans, and they started investing. And to be fair to Boris Johnson, he has started the process. We will now have 2 cycle lanes in the heart of London, which is a major example to start the process going, but there are thousands of miles of London to make safer. So what we're doing in our 10 for 2020 challenge to the London mayoral candidates, we're saying spend 10% of the TfL budget over the next 5 years on cycling, and we will transform London for the better for everybody.
What would you say to listeners of BBC Radio London? And I've spoken to people, not this morning, that we might hear from some of them between now and midday, who say, look, we've got a problem in this city. It's to do with the cyclists. They have no respect for law. They jump the red lights, all of these things that I mentioned earlier. What do you say to people who have that view and maybe have witnessed such incidents, who are listening this morning, who get frustrated with cyclists in this city?
I can understand when there's a law there and people see people breaking the law, they get frustrated. But one of the interesting things that we have put to all the mayoral candidates is a suggestion to break this conflict. And it's actually quite an interesting solution. It's called the Idaho Law. And we were quite surprised the media didn't actually notice when we put out a press release saying all the mayoral candidates have agreed to consider it in London. What the Idaho law says, at a traffic junction, cyclists treat the red light as a real right-of-way sign. That means if they can turn left out of the way of the HGV trucks, when it's red, when there's no pedestrian crossing the road. Pedestrians always have priority, but at a red light, if it's traffic-free and pedestrian-free, the cyclist can turn left. This is done in parts of America, it's being done in Paris, it's done in Japan. And that would break some of this silly conflict about a minor issue, which isn't leading to all of the deaths.
Right, and you're saying that all of the London mayoral candidates who have been announced so far have agreed with that proposal?
All the four major party candidates have agreed to consider it in their replies to us.
Interesting. Well, good that you've had the opportunity to get that message out, and I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you. Donnachadh McCarthy from Stop Killing Cyclists on BBC Radio London. There is a possible solution. There is support, as you heard, for this idea that the way cycling deaths are treated by police and prosecutors needs to change, and there needs to be a presumption that the driver, in civil cases, is at fault. Your reaction, 020 722 42000. This is BBC Radio London. Good morning, Monday morning, BBC Radio London. I'm Duncan Bark, sitting in for Vanessa Feltz all this week. Let's get to your calls. Adrian's in Bromley. Morning, Adrian.
Good morning to you, Duncan.
Yes, sir.
Now, there are a lot of irresponsible cyclists and vehicle drivers out there, and as a responsible cyclist, I'm always challenging both. But the problem with letting the CPS, that's the Criminal Protection Service, handle lawbreakers is that all we ever hear from them is insufficient evidence, insufficient evidence, insufficient evidence. So how can we cyclists get justice? The police won't challenge job cyclists, so how can we get anywhere?
Well, I can't answer that. Tell me your experiences as both a driver and a cyclist.
I'm not a driver. I gave up driving when I reached 73 years ago.
Oh, right. So as a cyclist who's now 73 years of age?
Yes.
What's it like on the roads of Bromley?
It's not safe. No one's safe anywhere in the London area cycling, but I just get on with it. But
not safe at all?
Well, I don't feel safe because there's so many idiots driving and cycling.
All right, give me an example of this idiot kind of behaviour then.
Well, I've had a lot of people, a lot of car drivers around my age and higher, who really have no idea about responsible driving. Not a clue. They shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a vehicle, let alone driving.
What's your definition of responsible driving?
Well, following the highway code.
Right.
Using your indicators, overtaking, leaving, because according to the highway code, they are compelled to leave cyclists one vehicle width distance, and some only just miss me, for example.
Okay, and do you see this often?
Yes, all the time.
Right. How can it... I mean, is it about changing attitudes or what? Because I spoke to someone earlier, a guy from Stop Killing Cyclists, and he used the word war. And I mean, war is a strong word, though I can say with, I think some pretty good authority, having spoken about this on radio stations over the years, cyclists and drivers in London and indeed elsewhere in Britain. I often wonder if there ever is going to be a solution where the two parties can ever get along.
Well, the problem is cyclists hate vehicle drivers and vehicle drivers hate cyclists.
All right, well, let's pick up on that. Do you hate vehicle drivers?
Only the irresponsible ones. But
right.
Some cyclists seem to hate every driver.
Now, where does that attitude come from, do you think?
There's too much traffic on the roads.
Right, well,
too much.
That's not going to change, is it?
No, so I can't see how you can change it.
No. Right, and I mean, what kind of bike do you ride, Adrian?
Just a normal full-size cycle.
Right, and how often? Are you riding every day?
Yes, weather permitting, I cycle between 8 and 16 miles a day.
Blimey, you must be healthy.
Yes, I am healthy. I'm a healthy vegan. I'm over-healthy.
A healthy vegan.
I do yoga 3 times a week. I do Sarok dancing. I can't work off all this energy.
You're putting me to shame, Adrian, because I'm massively overweight, and, you know, I eat as much red meat as I can muster. You never get me on a bicycle.
Duncan, look, get off all the muck. Eat real food, vegan food, and I guarantee within 6 months you'll be as fit as I am.
Well, I might not have any choice. I might have to consider it a little bit later on. Tell me then, life on 2 wheels, you cycle, up to 16 miles a day. If you could wave a wand when it comes to cycling in London, and you could change it, what would you do in terms of changing the road system or the laws? What would you like to see?
I want the law to start challenging lawbreakers, the police. I've seen cyclists on pavements passing what few police you see walking on the pavement, and they totally ignore them. They won't challenge yob cyclists. They won't do it.
And do you think that kind of behaviour gives people like yourself a bad name?
Yes, I get hell from car drivers because of these yobbos. Yeah. They think we're all yobs, and most of us aren't.
Interesting. Adrian, thank you for your call. Good to talk to you this morning on BBC Radio London. I'll ponder becoming a vegan. Al is in Bethnal Green. Morning, Al.
Good morning, Duncan.
What are your thoughts?
Right, look, I'm not biased. I'm a cyclist, I'm a motorcyclist, I'm a pedestrian, and I'm a London...
I've got to put my hand up, Al, and say whenever someone comes on the radio and show and starts off by saying I'm not biased, I do wonder.
Well, you can listen to me arguments first.
Go on.
Are you ready?
Yes.
This morning, I'm driving to work in my cab. I've had one gentleman on a bicycle who thanked me for letting him through. I've had one gentleman on a bicycle who ran over two pedestrians, and I tried to catch him, but he shot off.
Well, when you say ran over, what happened?
They were all crossing on a crossing, a zebra crossing, not a pelican, sorry, it was the one where we're supposed to give way by law. There was a lot of pedestrians crossing. He went straight through them and knocked two of them over.
Were they hurt?
One was spun round, the other one burst him, excuse me, and the cyclist shot off.
Right.
And the next incident was a young lady. Me and a lorry driver had the right of the way that the traffic lights was going through on green light. She came through on a red light and cursed me and the lorry driver, and we could have quite easily have killed her. Mm-hmm. So I've had a gentleman who was a very nice cyclist. I've seen a lot of nice cyclists, and I've seen two absolute idiots. I've also seen idiots driving cars this morning, talking on their phones. They've got beautiful cars, but they can't afford an earpiece. If the vehicles are all registered and we get caught, we drive away, we get prosecuted. The cyclist who ran the two people over this morning, he zoomed away. There's no way of catching him except physically restraining him. If we'd have had a number plate on him, he wouldn't have done it.
So you're advocating, as I've certainly heard other callers to BBC Radio London do and suggest, which is that cyclists need to have some form of registration plate, some kind of identifying number.
Duncan, if we all add numbers, it makes most people abide by the law. This gentleman who was talking about Stop Killing Cyclicts with the Idaho law, what he said was, it's a minor issue if the cyclist goes for a red light. It ain't a minor issue. It's a fundamental issue that he's breaking the law and he's causing a danger to himself and other people.
Well, whenever I talk to cyclists and I put to them the suggestion you just made, which is, well, there are people in London, drivers in London, who think that you should have some kind of registration plate or a identifying number so people know who you are. They go, you can't do that because cycling is all about having the freedom and feeling the air in your hair as you go around the city. It's about life on two wheels. It shouldn't be regulated in that way.
Look, I'm a motorcyclist as well. I love life on two wheels.
Yeah, but as a motorcyclist, you've got a registration plate, haven't you?
I've got a registration plate. But you just said about the cyclists who say, oh, well, it's life on two wheels and we can do this and do that. You can still ride a bike if you've got a number plate, except you can't ride it through traffic lights. You can't ride on the pavement. You can't run people over. It's absolutely crazy what that gentleman was saying about the Idaho law. And making people, break the law on one, it's only a minor issue.
So what about this idea that's being suggested that there should be presumption, that you should presume the driver is at fault in civil cases? I mean, clearly what you've said, you wouldn't support that then?
Not at all, mate, not at all. How am I myself and the lorry driver at fault this morning, going through 20 miles an hour, a green light, the cyclist comes straight, how am I at fault? How's the lorry driver at fault?
Will cyclists and drivers in London ever find peace and harmony together, Al?
Do you know what, Duncan, truthfully, if we all obey the law, we'll all get on a lot easier.
All right, I'm going to let you go. Have a safe morning. That's Al in Bethnal Green on BBC Radio London. This one will continue. 020 722 42000. Be part of what we're talking about this morning. It's BBC Radio London. It's 10:30. It is BBC Radio London. I'm Duncan Bark, sitting in for Vanessa Feltz all this week. The number 020 722 42000. If we can find a solution here, we might end up winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm just talking about cyclists and drivers in this city of ours. Do you think they'll ever find peace, love and harmony together? I know it's a big ask, but I'm looking at this because we're talking about the comments from the former Director of Public Prosecutions. His name is Sir Keir Starmer. He said the way cycling deaths are treated by police and prosecutors may need to change. He spoke to the BBC earlier, and this is what he said.
I think there's a very strong case for saying where there's a death involved, if it's serious enough to have had a criminal investigation, then it really ought to go off to the CPS for a final decision.
That's Sir Keir Starmer, former Director of Public Prosecutions, now a Labour MP. Do you agree with what he says? 020 722 4000. This idea that drivers need to face more responsibility for cycling accidents or fatalities, as he's just outlined. Send me a text, start your message with the word London, add your comment, send it all off to 81333 and be kind enough to put your name in the end. You can email vanessa@bbc.co.uk. We had a chap on earlier from an organisation called Stop Killing Cyclists, and he said many things. One of the things he said was the idea that we need to look at London and make it more cycle-friendly, and comparing it to places like Amsterdam. Do you think that is remotely possible? Could London ever be like Amsterdam when it comes to moving around on two wheels and pedalling? 020 722 4000. Let's go back to your calls. James is in Walthamstow. Hello, James.
Hello, good morning, Duncan.
Good morning. What are your thoughts on this one this morning?
There's a silver bullet here that nobody seems to have recognised. The car industry is quite keen to keep it quiet, so it's big oil. But it's an electric bike. Electrically assisted bicycles solve pretty much all the problems you've been talking about.
Right, these are the ones with mini motors that if you can't be bothered to pedal, then you just turn on the motor, right?
Almost. They have a motor and a battery. The battery's detachable, so you can charge it up like you do your mobile phone.
Yeah.
The main thing is that there's a sensor which measures how hard you're pushing on the pedals, and that sensor controls how much electrical assistance you get from the motor. So it's a very intuitive, natural cycling feeling. It's not a moped. You don't sit there with your feet up.
No.
You actually get the exercise, and in fact, most people find they get more exercise because it's easier to travel further and faster, so they use the e-bike as they're called.
The e-bike. Have you got one of these
e-bike.
things?
I sell them at Just E-Bikes.
Ah, right, you see. Right, okay.
I'm an expert in e-bikes, but I didn't call for...
No, I'm teasing you. All right, so well, let's talk to you in both capacities. And I mean, if you sell these things, are more and more people buying them?
Yes. Yeah, there's a marked increase over the last 2 or 3 years. We've been in the business about 8 years.
Yeah.
And, 5 years ago, the first thing we had to do is explain to people what an electric bike was, rather like yourself, Duncan, this morning.
Yes.
But now people are coming in there, and the question on their mind is which electric bike to buy.
But why are they buying them, James? Why is there an increase in interest?
Because what's really fascinating, you always get the sort of older generations whose parents are dead, they've got nothing to prove, they could be more adventurous, and they're willing to try new things. Then you get the sort of 40-something, 30-somethings who, he and she, are both running so fast to keep pace with their peers in their competitive lives. They don't have time to look left or right at alternatives. But what's really fascinating for us, what we're seeing coming into our store on Portobello Road, is younger people, first jobs, fresh out of college, university, or what have you. They're standing on the doorstep of our shop in Portobello, and they're looking up and down the street. They see these lovely German shiny motor cars. Yes. They all cost somewhere between 10 and 40 grand. Then they see somebody, from the state mafia coming along, dolloping on parking fines onto every one of the windscreens. They then open their wallets and look inside and just think, this is a joke. The car is just such an outdated mode of transport for travelling around London or Paris or Amsterdam.
All right, you've done a good pitch there, and it's interesting to hear your view on this. But join the dots for us this morning. How will this improve safety in London when it comes to cycling?
Very easy. If you're Bradley Wiggins, you don't have any problem keeping up with traffic. So the speed differential between cars and vans, lorries, what have you, and bicycles is the issue here. So imagine a situation. Mr. Jones is cycling down the road. There's a red light in front of him. There's a queue of traffic. He filters to the front.
Yep.
Everybody sits there. They wait for the red light to turn green. The red light turns green. Everybody pulls away. But Mr. Jones is in front of everybody in his bicycle. He's wobbling away slowly. The guy trying to deliver pizzas or whatever it is, the taxi driver behind him, is getting a bit frustrated because he can't slide past. Eventually, he does slide past. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes putting a bit of pressure on the cyclist to sort of get him
we've all seen this, and you've painted a very good picture.
So then the next thing that happens is eventually the pizza man or the taxi driver or just the guy going about his business gets past the cyclist. Then they come up to another set of red lights, and what happens? The van and the cars and whatnot stop at the red lights, and here comes Mr. Jones, filters through, and he's at the front again.
Yes.
Now, any 2-mile journey in London on a bicycle, you're going to find this situation. So that pizza guy, the taxi guy, the whoever, all these guys in their cars, they've got steam coming out of their ears for frustration having to overtake the same cyclist 15 times. The guy on the bike he's got to cycle with his elbows out. And all right,
I think people listening this morning have got the picture. So how does it change with an e-bike?
So how does it change that? So you're sitting at the red lights on an electric bike.
Yeah.
Irrespective of your fitness level, you put some pressure on the pedal, you out-accelerate the traffic.
Well, how does that work? How fast do these things go?
They're legally limited to 27.5 kilometres an hour, which is 17.3 miles an hour.
Oh, that's
which is way above the average London, traffic speed, as you well know. So it's really a question. So imagine that scenario. So Mr. Jones has now pulled away. He's flying down the road at 15 or 16 miles an hour. The guy trying to deliver his pizzas or deliver his, whatever they're doing in their cars, moving around town, they're not frustrated. The guy on the bike's cool because he's not having to ride with his elbows sticking out. Everybody's happy. In Holland last year, 25% of the bicycles sold were electric. They don't even have any hills. They just see it as a natural evolutionary step. And for some reason in the UK, this is, it's taking off, but it's slower. Just to put this in perspective, last year, 36 million people around the world bought an electric bike. To put that in perspective, 81 million people bought a car last year. I mean, this is happening, but the UK were a bit slow on the uptake, but it's coming.
I'll tell you what, James, I'm glad you called up. Thank you, because not only have I learned about e-bikes this morning, I suspect people listening to BBC Radio London have had some new thoughts to consider. That's James in Walthamstow. The solution to having safer cycling in this city of ours is to be on an e-bike, which is an electronic bike, which has a top speed of 17.3 miles per hour. I think he said. Just trying to work out what that would be like. Getting off the traffic lights when they go green. 020-722-4200. All of this chat comes about because we have the former Director of Public Prosecutions. His name is Sir Keir Starmer. He's now a Labour MP, and you heard him on our news earlier saying the way cycling deaths are treated by police and prosecutors may need to change. We're getting some really interesting views coming in here, and also something that was echoed earlier by our cycling campaigner from Stop Killing Cyclists, saying that in the judiciary and also the police in this city and in this country, there aren't people who tend to cycle. And there is I suppose, something that is developing this out, and it's been suggested by some legal people, including Martin Porter, QC, that certainly the police look at cycling as a dangerous activity. And he goes on to say their emphasis, he's talking about the police, and the emphasis of some coroners is upon whether a cyclist is wearing a crash helmet or high-vis equipment, rather than whether the people driving in the vicinity of vulnerable road users like cyclists are taking the appropriate amount of care not to collide with them. Do you think he's onto something now? Are we guilty collectively? And I say we, that's if you move around London using four wheels with a motor in a bonnet out the front. Are we collectively guilty, perhaps, of just looking at cyclists in a certain way? Like they're an irritant on the road, like they're, look at them, they're cycling dangerously, they haven't got a helmet on, blah, 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 blah. Are we somehow guilty as drivers? You're a cyclist and you're listening to BBC Radio London this morning. Let's get you on. And we had a fella on earlier from Bromley who's 73, who cycles up to 16 miles a day. He doesn't feel safe. 020-722-4200. Danny's in Euston. Hello, Dan.
Oh, hi, Duncan.
Good morning.
Yeah, there was a chap earlier on who mentioned, and you concurred with him, something like, if we had index plates, registration marks on bicycles, that would help the situation.
I didn't concur. I mean, what I said was, whenever I talk about cyclists and drivers on a radio station like this and on a radio show like this, it is often said, what we need to do is have license plates on cycles and cyclists, and that way we know who they are. It's a view I hear often.
No, well, it's a view that is totally wrong. And I'll tell you for why. Unless or until those index marks have some kind of electronic tag, RFID tag on them, it wouldn't work. And the reason why, having accepted, as I said to you before, and so many presenters on LBC, is that having accepted that cyclists, 90%, as I said to you before, not 30%, not 2%, 9% break the law anyway, jump red ATSs.
Well, hang on a second. Whoa.
You said that last time.
Hang on. Where's this statistic come from?
My own experience.
All right, so it's not an official statistic.
57 years at the University of Life and 40-odd years. I was a cyclist in the 70s, and I can tell you that these days, that is the case. Now,
so hang on. No, Dan, slow down. Dan, slow down. I'm not interrupting you for fun. I'm interested in what you got to say. So you're saying that 90% break the law?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, if that is the case, now let's set that for a moment. If that is the case, do you think they would hesitate for 1 second if they were to be issued with index marks, that they would not obscure that with a convenient coat, that they would not illegally alter those numbers and letters, or that they would not steal someone else's?
Aren't you in danger of painting every cyclist in London on the roads of this? Hang on, I haven't even asked the question yet. Aren't you in danger of painting them as some kind of outlaw, some kind of lawbreaker who's just one step removed away from holding up a bank?
Well, that's almost what they are. 80 to 90% of them are that. It would not work to have index marks who was physically with a number, etc., on a plastic plate or whatever. It would not work.
All right, what is the answer, Danny?
The answer is this, or perhaps the answer is this, Duncan. At the moment, we have the Boris bikes.
Yeah.
Now, when you dock them and all the rest of it, they are electronically recorded. I don't know if they have GPS on them or something, but that's got to be the answer. You literally have to have some kind of RFI tag on a bicycle to send out a message on a sensor somewhere. Literally. It will literally have to come down to that.
And presumably you'd be in favour of doing it with cars as well?
Well, it already is with cars, because you've got AMPers on cars, haven't you? The police have AMPers, ANPR. And it usually comes back down to that index. The only trouble is, of course, with the congestion charge in London, false plating has gone through the roof, as I've said before. And that's what will happen. Should plating come on bicycles, false plating will go through the roof. They won't give a damn about that. They will just alter and obscure and etc.
You don't like cyclists much, do you?
Look, I used to be a cyclist in the 70s. I cycled before most of these so-called cyclists of today were even thought of when I'm born. I know the streets of London.
What do you mean? Well, hang on. This your language is delicious. What do you mean, so-called cyclists?
It does seem a bit, but I can't help that. The majority of cyclists, as I have said, they don't give a damn about the law, etc., etc. By the way, the business about you said if London was turned into a sort of mini Amsterdam, you said, didn't you? Would that would that help it?
Well, let me just put it into context for you, because people hear what they sometimes want to hear on the radio. It was the comments based on the previous caller, the campaigner from Stop Killing Cyclists, who said we need to look at places like Amsterdam and learn lessons.
Yes, we do. But, of course, when we look at Amsterdam, right, now I've cycled in Berlin. I've never cycled in Paris, but I know what the roads are like in Paris. Now, Berlin and Paris have wide roads, and usually it works. Also, in Amsterdam, of course, everything is geared towards cyclists, or a lot of it is geared towards cyclists. They have a different social attitude. And that is why, if we had a virtual Amsterdam in London, it would never, ever work. And the reason why is because the British social attitude is not the same towards such things as it is in Amsterdam.
All right, Danny, we've got to leave it there, but thank you. Work safely this morning. Danny in Euston on BBC Radio London. That's the name of this radio station. 020 722 42000. Getting some great calls on this. I'd like a few more, please, between now and 11. Do drivers need to face more responsibility for cycling fatalities, cycling accidents? This idea that you presume the driver in a civil case is at fault. 020 722 42000. I suppose a supplementary question has got to be, do you ever think that drivers and cyclists will be able to exist as one in this city of ours? This is BBC Radio London. Annie's in Chiswell Green, saying, as a cyclist and a driver, my observation is that 90% of cyclists are to blame. To bring in presumed fault against drivers is to go against the law of the land, innocent until proven guilty, and would encourage the lycra louts to ride even more selfishly. Boris bikers are much more considerate, but there's still room for improvement. I am struck by some of the language that's been used so far this morning. We had Danny in Euston, who, and I don't think I'm misrepresenting you here, Danny, because I did put this to you, is almost painting cyclists in London as some kind of outlaw, and he said 90% of them break the law. Then you have Annie here on the text who's saying, look, 90% are to blame, and using the term lycra louts. I mean, where does this animosity come from? Will there ever be peace between cyclists and drivers in this city of ours? And what needs to change? Gail Naguzi on Twitter says, a change in liability won't fix anything unless both parties become extra careful. Bad drivers / cyclists will remain the problem. Steve's in Streatham. Hello, Steve.
Oh, good morning, Duncan.
Morning.
Your last caller used a word which is it's apparent in everybody's calls, really, and that word was attitude. For some reason, cyclists have an attitude of, according to a lot of motorists, of arrogance, of wanting to be somewhere and breaking the law and so on. And that breeds a kind of warlike situation, an aggression, antipathy towards each other. And I think the way round it, in one small way, could be just a simple idea. A lot of motorists have said, can they be registered? They don't need to be, they need to be registered in some way. What they do, any cyclist who rides in London has to wear a fluorescent jacket with a registration number on the back. If someone isn't riding with such a jacket, it's illegal and he should be pulled off by a policeman. Now, that would bring the cyclist attitude, knowing that they can be traced, it might bring some of them to their senses. It would also calm down the car drivers because they know that that person can be traced.
I mean, do you want to live in a city where we regulate cyclists in that way? Because there'll be some people listening who think, well, that's remarkably heavy-handed. There you are, you get a bike off eBay for 30, 40 quid. Now you're going to have a luminous jacket on and have a number written on the back.
Yeah, I think so, because too many cyclists are being killed. And the situation is kind of...
But how would that make any difference? Forgive me. I mean, the registration number and the luminous jacket, I mean, I see, look, there are all kinds of cyclists in this city of ours, right? And, there are plenty of those who already wear luminous jackets and have lights on their bikes. And
they wouldn't have a registration number on the back.
But that's not going to stop an accident, is it?
Well, the guy that knocked down 2 pedestrians this morning, he would be immediately traceable.
Yes.
He would know that, and he probably wouldn't ride that way.
Oh, understood. All right, but that would mean there'd be some responsibility. You'd be able to find the person and say, look, we know who you are because your number was noted. But it wouldn't necessarily stop certain accidents from happening, would it?
No, but you're never going to stop all accidents. I mean, we all have to insure our cars and tax our cars, and yet there's a regular death toll on the roads. Accidents happen, but it's more possible that a cyclist will be hurt simply because they're more vulnerable. They're on the inside, they're on the outside, they're not wearing helmets. There's all sorts of factors that gravitate towards cyclists being hurt. And the more that we can kind of get away from that, we don't want them hurt. So if we can calm them in that way of having the registration jacket and being in the mainstream, as it were. I mean, a guy with the e-bike, 27 miles an hour, that's just under the legal limit.
No, it was 27 kilometres an hour, but I was 17.3 miles per hour was the figure. But I understand the point you're making. Stephen Streatham, thank you. We'll talk to Christina in the West End in a few moments. Just some more of your messages coming in. Mark emails to say, responsible cyclists and drivers need to be more careful. Whilst using a pedestrian crossing in a responsible manner, I have had cyclists zoom past and yell profanities at me as I'm crossing, with right to do so, while whilst cars are stopped. To top it off, I've also been hit by a cyclist who hit me so hard he broke my finger, but he kept on going down the street. The impression I get is that cyclists think that because they fit between cars in between lanes, they can skirt around and zoom past people and get away with it. Mark, thank you. And a different Mark here emails to say the key issue is the inadequacy of London's road system. It was designed for the horse and cart, not for cars, lorries and bikes. It's rarely possible to give cyclists a vehicle's width or worth of clearance. The situation is better on the continent and also in many other British cities. It's all down to investment. This is what we should be debating. Well, let's have the debate this morning on BBC Radio London. Christina's in the West End. Good morning.
Oh, hello, good morning. Thank you for calling me back.
A pleasure. What would you like to say?
I would like to say that for some time now, I stopped watching for cars when I want to cross the road, or motorbikes. I'm just watching for bikes. I mean, it's just incredible, especially in the West End. I don't know what's happening outside. Even the drivers, when they stop at the zebra crossing, and you're supposed to cross the street, I don't even trust what's happening next to him. It's just amazing. I mean, they come from everywhere. They're more or less flying. I don't know where they come from, these people. I mean, one of them, he just came onto my lap one day. Just unbelievable. So I find them extremely dangerous for people who actually walk in the street.
Right, but I mean, cyclists listening to what you're saying will take the view, well, look, I'm perfectly entitled to cycle on the streets of London, just as you are perfectly entitled to walk on the streets of London.
Right, yeah, I know.
Is there a halfway house here? Is there a middle ground that can be created and developed, do you think?
Well, I mean, they should, first of all, they should wear some kind of clothes where you can see them. You don't see them most of the time. They are just invisible, more or less. They just come suddenly in front of you in such speed.
Really? Well. I mean, are they more invisible than? I mean, they're on an appliance. They're cycling on something. I mean, you can see cyclists, can't you?
Yes, I can see them, yes. But the thing is, they don't probably see me or something. I don't know what's happening exactly, but I can see everything else. I can see a car.
Yes.
Cars usually respect you quite a lot, and motorbikes as well, which are supposed to be the most dangerous, but I don't think so. I think bikes are the worst, actually. I mean, it's just unbelievable the way they just don't care.
All right, you believe they don't care. Christina in the West End, thank you. We'll keep this going after 11. I mean, if you are listening to BBC Radio London this morning and you find yourself shouting at the radio some of the callers and some of the views that you've heard, let's get you on the air. 020 722 4200. I mean, this is very much a London issue. Sadly, as we know, the number of deaths on the streets of London when it comes to cyclists over the last 12 months. Do drivers need to face more responsibility for cycling accidents and cycling fatalities? And will London ever be safe for cyclists?